The first time I realized my new neighbors were the kind of people who smiled with their mouths but not their eyes was the day I watched a man in a neon safety vest hammer a fence post straight into my backyard, not near my property line, not accidentally over it by an inch or two. I mean fully, confidently, 8 feet inside my land like they already owned the damn thing. And the craziest part was, when I brought it up, they acted like I was the problem. Looking back now, I think that was the moment this whole thing stopped being about a fence and turned into something uglier, something personal. My name's Daniel Mercer. I'm 47, divorced, no kids. And for almost 12 years, I lived in this quiet little neighborhood outside Columbus, Ohio, where absolutely nothing ever happened. The kind of place where people waved while mowing their lawns and argued over trash cans being left out too long. My house sat on the corner of a dead-end street. Nothing fancy, just an old white Craftsman with a deep backyard and a line of maple trees that turned bright orange every fall. Honestly, that backyard was the reason I bought the place in the first place. It felt open, peaceful, like you could breathe back there. The previous owner, old man named Walter, never believed in fences. He used to say fences made neighbors suspicious of each other before they even had a reason to be. Maybe that sounds naive now, but for over a decade he was right. Nobody ever questioned where the property line was. Everybody just kinda knew. Then Walter died. The house behind mine got sold, and within 2 weeks the peace I'd had for 11 years disappeared under the sound of nail guns and diesel engines. The new couple moved in during early spring. Ethan and Claire Holloway. Young, maybe early 30s, money people for sure. You could tell immediately. Brand new black SUV. Expensive patio furniture arriving before they'd even unpacked their boxes. Contractors coming and going every single day. At first I tried being friendly, brought over a 6-pack, introduced myself, welcomed them to the neighborhood. Claire barely looked up from her phone while Ethan shook my hand like he was trying to close a business deal. "We've got big plans for the property," he told me, grinning, trying to modernize the place a little. I remember laughing and saying, "Well, just don't turn it into a spaceship." He didn't laugh back. That should have told me something. Over the next couple weeks, their backyard transformed into a construction site. Trees removed, stone patio installed, new sod rolled out, workers everywhere. The older neighbors started complaining quietly during our evening walks. Mrs. Ramirez from across the street said the floodlights they installed practically lit up her bedroom at night. My next-door neighbor Vince joked that the Holloways renovated like they were trying to impress a reality TV crew. Still, none of that bothered me much. People spend their money how they want. Then the fencing company showed up. I was sitting on my porch drinking coffee when the trucks pulled in around 7:30 in the morning. Cedar panels stacked high, metal brackets, concrete mix bags, the whole thing. At first I figured they were fencing their side yards. Pretty normal. But around lunchtime, I glanced out back and got this weird feeling in my stomach. The fence looked off. You know how sometimes your brain notices something before you consciously understand it? That's what it felt like. I stood there staring at it for a minute, coffee cup still in my hand, trying to figure out why the angle looked wrong. Then it hit me. The fence was way too close to my maple trees. I walked out into the yard with an old tape measure I kept in the garage and started pacing the distance from the corner tree to the fence line. 30 feet. That's what it had always been. I knew because years ago Walter and I measured it together while planting those trees. But now, 22. I measured it 3 times because honestly, I didn't want to believe it. 8 feet. 8 whole feet of my backyard sat trapped behind their brand new fence like somebody had quietly stolen part of my life while I slept. And the thing about land disputes people don't tell you is, it's never really about the dirt. It's the disrespect that gets under your skin, the assumption that you won't fight back, that you'll stay polite because causing tension feels uncomfortable. I remember standing there staring at that fence while the workers packed up for the day. And this weird mix of anger and disbelief kept building in my chest because deep down, I already knew this wasn't an accident. That evening, I walked over to their house trying very hard to be reasonable about the whole thing because contrary to what people think now, I wasn't looking for a fight back then. Honestly, I hate conflict. I'm the kind of guy who apologizes when somebody bumps into me at the grocery store. But there's something about seeing your own property disappear behind somebody else's fence that flips a switch inside you. Ethan answered the door wearing gym shorts and one of those quarter-zip pullovers finance guys seem born wearing. Behind him, I could hear music playing and dishes clinking around like they were already celebrating their perfect new backyard. "Hey," I said. keeping my tone calm. I think the fence might actually be over the property line a little. He frowned immediately, not confused, annoyed, like I'd interrupted something more important. Our contractor followed the survey stakes, he said. You sure? I asked. Because it looks like it crossed pretty far into my yard. He leaned one shoulder against the doorframe and shrugged. Well, the company does this professionally. So, that little pause at the end irritated me more than the words themselves. It had that subtle condescending edge people use when they already think you're wrong. I asked if I could see the survey paperwork. He said he didn't have it handy. I asked if maybe they could double-check before finishing the final section. He gave me this tight little smile and said, Daniel, the fence is already installed and paid for. I think we're good. Then he nodded once like the conversation was over. I walked home trying to convince myself maybe it really was a mistake. Maybe the contractor screwed up. Maybe Ethan was just stressed from the renovation. But around midnight, I looked out my kitchen window and saw floodlights illuminating that giant cedar fence behind my trees. And all I could think was, they know. They absolutely know. The next morning, I called a survey company. An older guy named Rick showed up 2 days later in muddy boots and a faded baseball cap. He looked exactly like the kind of man you'd trust to settle a property dispute. Quiet, methodical, no nonsense. He spent almost 3 hours walking the perimeter with equipment that looked expensive enough to launch satellites. Around noon, he finally lowered his tripod and said, Well, you're not going to like this. How bad? I asked. He pointed toward the Holloway's fence. They're about 8 feet over your line all the way across. Even expecting it, hearing somebody officially confirm it made my stomach drop. Rick started placing bright orange flags along the real property boundary, and every single one landed deep inside Ethan's fenced backyard. It looked ridiculous, like somebody had dropped a trail of warning markers through the middle of their expensive landscaping project. I took photos immediately, sent them in an email, tried to stay professional. Hey Ethan, got the survey completed. Looks like the fence was installed approximately 8 feet inside my property line. Attached are the photos. Let me know how you'd like to handle correcting it. No response. Not that day. Not the next one either. A full week went by. Every morning I'd look out back and see those orange survey flags sitting there untouched while Ethan grilled burgers 20 feet away, pretending they didn't exist. Finally, I walked over again. This time Claire answered. She opened the door halfway, wine glass in hand, eyes already irritated before I'd said a word. Is Ethan around? I asked. Why? I just wanted to follow up about the fence. She let out this exhausted sigh like I was some annoying salesman interrupting dinner. Hold on. Ethan came to the door a minute later, and before I could even start talking, he said, Look, moving the fence would cost a fortune. No apology, no acknowledgement. Just straight into negotiation mode. That's not really my problem, I said. It's on my property. He crossed his arms. You still have plenty of yard. I actually laughed because I genuinely couldn't believe somebody would say that out loud. Are you seriously suggesting I just give you 8 feet of my land? Another shrug. Fences end up a little off sometimes. That sentence. I swear to God, that sentence changed everything for me. Because there's a certain type of person who mistakes patience for weakness. Ethan had decided I was that kind of man. Then he looked past me toward my yard and added, Listen, we already spent a lot improving this place. Tearing everything up over a few feet seems unnecessary. A few feet. Like my property was some optional inconvenience standing in the way of his landscaping plans. I remember feeling my face get hot, not because of the land itself, but because of how casually dismissive he was about it, like money automatically made him entitled to whatever he wanted. Move the fence, I said quietly. He stared at me for a second, then slowly closed the door in my face. No dramatic slam. Honestly, that almost made it worse. Just a calm, deliberate click, like I wasn't worth another second of his attention. I stood there on their porch hearing muffled music inside the house, while anger crawled up the back of my neck in waves. And here's the part people don't understand when they hear the story later and cheer me on for what happened next. At first, I still didn't want revenge. I just wanted fairness. But fairness only works when both people believe the rules apply to them. Ethan didn't. A couple days later, my buddy Vince came over with beers and found me sitting in the backyard staring at the fence like a widower at a gravesite. You gonna sue him? He asked. I don't know. Vince took a sip and squinted toward the Holloway's yard. Guy's an asshole. That's becoming clear. You know what his problem is? Vince said. People like that spend their whole lives thinking consequences are for other people. That line stuck with me longer than I expected. Because the truth was, Ethan never acted nervous. Not once. He walked around confidently watering flowers on stolen property like the matter was already settled, and that confidence started bothering me more than the fence itself. So one night, I pulled up the county property records online and started reading. Easements, encroachments, land use rights, adverse possession laws, 3 straight hours of legal jargon and badly scanned PDF documents. Then I found something interesting. Very interesting. Even though the fence enclosed the land physically, legally, that 8-foot strip still belonged entirely to me, which meant I had every right to access it, modify it, build on it, landscape it, whatever I wanted. And suddenly, this stopped feeling like a problem. It started feeling like an opportunity. The next morning, I called a landscaping contractor named Miguel, who'd done work for me years earlier. Hypothetically, I asked him, how difficult would it be to install heavy planter boxes along a narrow strip of land? He laughed. How hypothetical are we talking? Petty neighbor dispute hypothetical. Ah, he said, immediately understanding the tone in my voice. Now that's my favorite kind. 3 days later, around 8 in the morning, a small excavator rolled into my driveway, followed by a flatbed trailer carrying steel posts and lumber. I'll never forget the look on Ethan's face when he stepped onto his deck holding a coffee mug and saw Miguel's crew unloading equipment directly beside his precious fence. He walked over fast, jaw tight already. What's going on? He demanded. Miguel looked at me. I looked at the survey flags. Then, I smiled for the first time in weeks. I'm building something on my property. For a second, Ethan just stood there blinking at me like his brain couldn't process what he was hearing. Then he pointed at the fence. That's our backyard. I remember almost laughing at how naturally the words came out of his mouth. Like if you build a fence around something long enough, it magically becomes yours. I nodded toward the orange survey flag still planted in the dirt. Actually, your fence is sitting in my backyard. Behind him, I could see Claire stepping out onto the deck now, arms folded tight across her chest, already sensing this conversation wasn't going where they wanted. Miguel's crew fired up the auger, and the sound ripped through the morning air while Ethan tried one last time to regain control of the situation. Daniel, he said, lowering his voice like we were suddenly 2 businessmen negotiating a merger, whatever this is, I'm sure we can figure something out. Funny how quickly people discover compromise once consequences start arriving in trucks. I looked him dead in the eye and said, I asked you to figure it out 2 weeks ago. Then I turned and walked away while the drilling started. And I'll admit something right now that probably makes me sound worse than I'd like. I enjoyed every second of what came next. Maybe a little too much. 12 steel posts went into the ground along that 8-foot strip, each sunk deep into concrete. The crew worked for 2 full days while Ethan hovered around his deck pretending not to watch. Other neighbors started slowing down during their evening walks just to stare. Vince practically brought popcorn. Mrs. Ramirez waved at me one afternoon and yelled, whatever you're building, I'm on your side. By day 3, the wooden planter boxes arrived. Massive things, waist-high, custom-built, lined up perfectly across the entire strip of land inside Ethan's fence. He finally came over again while Miguel's guys were filling them with soil. What exactly are you planting? He asked. Bamboo, I said casually. I swear the color drained from his face. You can't be serious. Fast-growing kind, too. Daniel, what? That'll block all the sunlight. I gave him the same shrug he'd once given me. Sometimes fences end up a little off. He stared at me for a long moment after that, and I could actually see the realization settling in behind his eyes. Not anger, not yet, regret, because for the first time since moving in, Ethan understood he wasn't dealing with somebody who would quietly absorb disrespect to keep the peace. The bamboo grew faster than even I expected. By midsummer, thick green stalks towered over the fence line like something out of a jungle movie. Their beautiful new deck now faced a dense living wall. Sunlight disappeared from half their patio by early afternoon. Claire's expensive flower beds started wilting in the shade. And the craziest part? Technically, I wasn't breaking a single rule. Every inch sat legally on my property. Every permit checked out. Every measurement documented. That was the beauty of it. They couldn't do anything except live with the consequences of their own arrogance. Still, despite how satisfying it sounds now, there were moments when I questioned myself. Late at night, I'd sit on the porch listening to bamboo leaves rattling in the wind, wondering if I'd crossed some invisible line inside myself too. Because revenge has this weird way of changing shape once you finally get it. At first it feels righteous. Then eventually you realize you've spent weeks feeding energy into somebody you don't even like. One evening, Vince came over again with beers and looked out at the giant green barrier towering behind the Holloway's yard. "That is the pettiest thing I've ever seen," he said, grinning. "Thanks, no," he laughed, raising his bottle. "I mean that as a compliment." A couple weeks later, there was a knock at my door. Ethan, alone this time. No confidence, no smug attitude, just exhaustion. He looked older somehow, like the stress had finally started pressing down on him. "Can we talk?" he asked quietly. I invited him onto the porch, and for a minute neither of us said anything. You could hear the bamboo rustling behind us in the evening wind, like it was mocking him personally. Finally, he sighed and rubbed his forehead. "Claire hates the backyard now." I stayed quiet. "The shade's killing everything." Another pause. Then he looked at me carefully and asked, "If I move the fence, will you remove the bamboo?" There it was, the sentence I'd been waiting months to hear. Not because I needed to win. Honestly, by then I was just tired. Tired of tension. Tired of looking at that fence every morning, feeling angry before I'd even had coffee. "Move it back to the actual property line," I said, "and the bamboo disappears the same week." He nodded slowly. No argument this time. No shrug. 2 weeks later, the fencing company returned. And let me tell you, watching those workers pull up every single cedar post they'd installed on my property felt unbelievably satisfying. Panel by panel, the fence moved backward, until it finally stood exactly where it should have been from the start. Once the job was done, Miguel's crew came back and removed the planters. Within a few days, sunlight poured across the Holloway's yard again, like nothing had happened. But something had happened. At least for me, because before all this, I used to think being a good neighbor meant avoiding conflict at all costs. Now, I think sometimes people only respect boundaries when ignoring them becomes more painful than honoring them. Ethan and I still live on the same street. We wave occasionally, short, polite waves, the kind exchange between two men who learn something unpleasant about each other. And every fall, when those maple trees turn orange again, I look out across my full backyard and think about how close I came to letting somebody take part of it, simply because I didn't want to seem difficult. So now I'm curious. What would you have done? Would you have sued them immediately? Let the fence stay to avoid the drama? Or done exactly what I did and made sure they understood the lesson the hard way? Let me know in the comments. Because honestly, people seem pretty divided on whether I defended my property or just became the bigger asshole. And if you've ever dealt with nightmare neighbors before, hit subscribe. Because trust me, this story isn't even the worst thing that's happened on this street.